Hello, I'm Eric Houston, and welcome to Press Play, a show about movies. I am coming to you now just moments after having finished watching the last of the Twilight movies. Now, I don't think I'd ever seen all of these movies before. I was not the target audience for these when they came out. I was in my late 20s, I was single. These just were not going to be a movie for me at that time. And as far as now, they're, sort of a movie for me. There's a lot of things about Twilight sort of conceptually that I really like. I like vampires. I like romance and angst and love, both requited and un. And these movies are chock-a-block with all of that stuff. There's also a lot of real talent in front of the camera. The cast of this movie, starting at the core, Kristen Stewart is a tremendous actress and has certainly grown into an incredible one. Same with Robert Pattinson. And as the movies go on, there are more and more great actors and character actors in the series. Bryce Dallas Howard pops up at one point. Michael Sheen is chewing scenery and bits and bobs throughout as the long-haired Italian vampire. I think his name is Arrow. Dakota Johnson does some really fun work as a scary little weirdo. And by the time you get to the last movie, you've got people like Lee Pace and Wendell Pierce showing up. So yeah, these are entertaining movies. I think the first just Twilight, is, I think, absolutely an entertaining movie. If you're only going to watch one, that's probably the one to watch. And it does really encapsulate the whole thing pretty well. It is not very much of a Jacob movie, if you remember there being Team Edward and Team Jacob. Edward, the vampire guy. This is pretty much his movie as he and Bella, played by Kristen Stewart, meet. And they begin there. Well, she wants to date him and he wants to date her, but he doesn't think that he should because he's a vampire, etc., etc. There's stuff in this that's just legitimately fun. There's stuff in it that's kind of so bad/weird that it's fun. The baseball scene in particular, where because they're vampires, they can hit the baseball so hard that it creates thunderclaps. That's pretty good. In the first Twilight, you have Anna Kendrick playing Bella's best friend. I love Anna Kendrick, and it's a delight to see her here just before she's about to explode into her own stardom. You also have the extended Cullen family. So if you haven't seen these movies, the deal is that Edward the vampire, he's part of this Cullen family, but they're not actually a family. They're just sort of vampires that all became vampires by the same guy, and they all kind of live together and hang out together. And because they never age, every now and again they move to a new town and re-enroll in high school so that people don't get wise. A stunt that in today's internet age seems like it would be increasingly difficult to pull off. But amongst the Cullens is my favorite vampire from the series. Alice is played by Ashley Greene. She's a little bit of a Cassandra in these movies where she can see the future, although people do generally believe her. She also has the best haircuts. These wonderful pixie haircuts that get better and better throughout the series. Sign me up. Big Alice stan. Team Alice right here. Moving on from Twilight, you have Eclipse and New Moon, and I thought those movies were pretty boring, if I'm being honest with you. And that's kind of my problem with Twilight. I don't have any problems with it in terms of it being romancy or YA or whatever. That's all fine. Bring it on. My problem is that they get a little bit dull, particularly in the middle. Both in the middle of individual movies and in the middle of the series. And I found Eclipse and New Moon to be pretty dull. Eclipse, I think, is conceptually pretty interesting because it's mostly a movie about Bella dealing with Edward having broken up with her. And Edward really isn't in the movie very much. And I think that's interesting. It makes it kind of a difficult hang for 2 hours because it's a little bit all right. You want to see it move on a little bit. Eclipse as a movie, even though I just saw it within the last couple of weeks, I'm struggling to remember really anything about. I'm sorry. I just am. I don't know what to tell you there. And then you've got Breaking Dawn, the finale of the series. Breaking Dawn Part 1, Breaking Dawn Part 2. Breaking Dawn Part 1 is a movie about Bella and Edward getting hitched and finally bumping uglies, only for that to get Bella pregnant and then for her vampire baby to start like eating her from the inside out, which sounds amazing. And it would be amazing for like 30 minutes, but the baby part lasts like, I don't know, an hour, hour and a half, and you just watch Bella waste away, and it's genuinely very creepy, but not in the right way, I don't think. It would be impactful in short doses. Over the length of a 2-hour movie, it really becomes sort of an endurance test for the audience. But things really build to a heck of a peak, as when Bella is about to have her baby, she starts to get sick, and Edward and Jacob, the werewolf fella, played by Taylor Lautner, they have to do something pretty grisly to get the baby out of there. I don't want to, if you haven't seen it, I don't want to ruin it for you because it's pretty wild, and I think it's worth seeing. And of course, Bella, I'm sorry to tell you, Bella dies in the delivery process, which means that it's time to bite her and finally make her into a vampire, which is, in its way, one of the key problems with the whole Twilight series. The vampires in these movies, guys, they don't really have the standard vampire weaknesses. These guys can go out in the day. They don't need to go back to coffins. And it's hard to watch these movies and not think, just make her a vampire, man. She wants it. Why not? Right? Like, when we finally get to Breaking Dawn Part 2 and she's a vampire, that is awesome. It's awesome to see her all like super powered and running around. She fights a cougar at one point. It's terrific. And it's fun to watch Kristen Stewart, who has been very angsty for 4 or 5 movies, be able to, run around and do all the fun vampire stuff. And Breaking Dawn Part 2, after 4 movies, is finally all the fun vampire stuff. So Bella and Edward have had their baby, the confusingly named Renesmee. She starts aging at a pretty fast rate, but the fact that she exists has angered Michael Sheen, Dakota Johnson, and their vampire elite. So Edward and Bella and their friends go travel around the world to put together a crew of cool vampires, including like Lee Pace, and Rami Malek, these cool vampires that we have never heard of or seen before in the series. They bring all of these guys together so that they can face off with Michael Sheen and Dakota Johnson and their crew of pale Italian weirdos on an ice field for the fate of the young Renesmee. Now, at this point, the movie gets really good, and you get to about the best 20 or 30 minutes of the entire series. But before we get to that is the whole, let's put the team together. Let's travel the globe. Let's find this vampire and meet him and convince him that Renesmee's okay. Now let's find this vampire and convince her that Renesmee's okay. And that part gets a little long in the tooth, a little repetitive, and I'm sorry to say a little bit boring. But it's all worth it for the last several minutes, because what happens out on the ice is an absolute vampire and werewolf free-for-all as dudes are beheaded left, right, and center. My beloved Alice gets to face off against Dakota Johnson's little weirdo who has the superpower of making people convulse in pain. There's all kinds of weird, bloodless violence. Michael Sheen chewing scenery like there's no tomorrow. It's such a spectacularly fun sequence that, to some degree, it alone makes the watching of the entire series worthwhile. Not entirely, maybe, but it is really fun and also so completely out of left field when compared to the events of the earlier movies. But it's still a really fun time for a series of movies that does get very navel-gazy at various points throughout. So pretty fun. So what do I recommend you watch? You should like Twilight. I would recommend the first Twilight. It's not going to be, I don't think, for absolutely everyone, but if you're interested in an angsty, semi-low budget teen vampire romance, you're not going to do any better. It's a solid movie. I would probably, if I were you, skip 2 and 3. Skip Eclipse and New Moon. They're pretty dreary and dull. Breaking Dawn Part 1, little bit harder to say. I wish it were, it's a full 2 hours, and I sort of wish it was just the first hour of a 2 hour and 3 hour movie. But they did what they did. It has its moments. I'm going to give Breaking Dawn Part 1 kind of a soft recommend, if only so you can ride the wave of watching Breaking Dawn Part 1 into Part 2, which is going to get, I don't know if it's my highest recommend of the series, because I think you do probably need to watch at least Twilight before watching Breaking Dawn Part 2. And to some extent, I think it would be pretty wild to watch one and then the other without watching any of the movies in between and just not really care about what happened in between, because the leap is pretty wild. But that's the Twilight Saga. I don't know that I really have any more thoughts about it. I sort of wish I was a little bit more into them than I am, but again, I'm very into individual elements of them. And there's certainly no denying what a huge and transformative thing they were for the movie industry. Like, they really were a shot in the arm for the whole YA genre. I don't think we have the Hunger Games movies, which are probably only marginally better, really, without Twilight, or any of the dozens of other movies that sprung out of those. Your Insurgents, your Maze Runners, all of those. Mostly movies I haven't seen, if I'm being entirely honest. And I really don't think, I don't remember which came first, if I'm being honest. If they broke Breaking Dawn into 2 movies, or that Harry Potter Deathly Hallows into 2 movies first. But that's certainly a legacy we're going to be continuing to deal with for a while, as greedy studios see how they can, milk an extra 700 million out of American audiences by releasing one movie as 2 movies. But there you go. So yeah, that's the Twilight Saga. I had a really good time with them. I think you probably will too. Until next time, stay safe, watch movies. Hey, you know what? Before I go, let's talk one more movie. Let's talk real quick about Splash. Because it seems to me that, Twilight, vampire romance movie, is not a million miles away from Splash, mermaid romance movie. What's to say? This is a movie, again, that I had seen before, but not in a very long time. I remember liking it well enough, and what happened is the missus and I, we were watching that new documentary about John Candy. A documentary that, incidentally, I didn't really like very much, if only because I felt like it really dwelled on John Candy's death and wasn't as much about his life and the exuberance therein. But that I'm getting ahead of myself. And there's obviously clips in that documentary of Splash, and John Candy's very funny in Splash. So we decided, let's watch Splash again. We hadn't seen Splash in a long time, and let me tell you something. Watching Splash in 2026, what a weird movie. It's okay. I don't think I really liked it that much. There's funny stuff in it. John Candy's pretty funny. He is a pretty big pervert in the movie, though. And while there's a pretty funny scene where he kind of barges into his workplace and brags about how his letter got published in Penthouse, there's also numerous scenes where he throws change on the ground and then tries to use that as an excuse to look up women's skirts, which I didn't especially care for. Tom Hanks throughout the movie is, frankly, about as unlikable as I've ever seen Tom Hanks be in a movie. I don't like his relationship with Daryl Hannah's character. He decides that he's in love with her and he tells her lots of stuff about him, but the movie really hinges on him not knowing much about Daryl Hannah. We need to get to the start of the third act before he realizes that Daryl Hannah is a mermaid, and as a result, she continually doesn't tell him anything about herself. And it just makes him seem like kind of a weird creep that he falls head over heels for this lady who he knows nothing about and seems very incurious about. Daryl Hannah gives a charming enough performance, but there's not a lot to her character. There's some fun stuff like when Tom Hanks asks her name and she squeaks like a dolphin. That's pretty fun, but she's not really weird or alien enough to really be interesting. Again, she's mostly just mooning over Tom Hanks. And the setup of the movie is that she first saw Tom Hanks when he fell off of a boat when he was a little boy, and she just, I guess, so happened to be there. And then she has spent the rest of her life mooning after Tom Hanks. And then there's this, she goes and she finds him, and then she has 6 or 7 days, I guess, to spend with him before she has to return to being a mermaid. The rules are never spelled out, which can sometimes be a benefit. I recently talked about that with the Gremlins movies, that not getting too deep into the rules can be a good thing. But here it makes it difficult to understand the stakes. And without even those like 3 Gremlins rules, you don't really know what's going on. At one point late in the movie, it seems like Eugene Levy announces that if you get a mermaid wet, she'll turn into a mermaid. Because I guess when Daryl Hannah is dry, she just has legs. But then when she gets wet, she becomes a fish lady. But that brings up all kind, like, can she not have a glass of water? Is what? How wet is wet enough to be a mermaid? And so there's this kind of late sequence in the movie where Eugene Levy, who's a scientist trying to prove that mermaids exists, chases Daryl Hannah around with like big water contraptions. But it might be fun to watch her in the rest of the movie try to avoid water so that she doesn't get found out. These are similar kinds of things to what's going on in The Little Mermaid, which is a movie I do like a lot. But what I think Little Mermaid benefits from is, one, we really get to know Ariel early in the movie. And 2, that movie is, in part because it's a cartoon, it has this fantastical setting from the get-go. So everything, the fairy tale-ness of it works. Whereas Splash is a movie that is weirdly grounded in the real world. I think too much so. There's too much real worldness in it, particularly in that third act, because once Eugene Levy is successful in revealing that Daryl Hannah is a mermaid, she is promptly abducted and imprisoned by the United States government for a very lengthy sequence where she is kept in a tank and experimented on. A thing that never seemed like it was a possibility throughout the rest of the movie, but which is very fitting with that sort of weird 80s instinct for comedies to end in these like really dramatic set pieces. Like how 3 Men and a Baby in its last act becomes very much about drug smuggling for some reason. Well, the same here. And it's a real disappointment. It would have been nice to see some more time for like the romance to develop, for Tom Hanks to get to know Daryl Hannah, for him to deal with her being a mermaid, and for us to learn a little bit of what her being a mermaid means. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil the end of this movie. I guess stop watching if you don't want to know. But like ultimately Tom Hanks jumps in the water with Daryl Hannah and they swim off together, and we watch them swim off during the credits. And the understanding is that, okay, Tom Hanks is leaving his life behind, including his brother, John Candy, who is absolutely going to jail for the rest of his life for breaking into a government facility. They swim off together, but then Tom Hanks doesn't become a mermaid. Like, it seemed like if the movie, and it doesn't really seem like that's what the movie's building toward, but just as a person who has seen movies, it seems like that's the logical place for this to go, much like it's logical to get to the point where Bella becomes a vampire in the Twilight movies. But that doesn't happen. We do get like this glimpse of an enormous underwater city that is within swimming distance of Manhattan, But that is it. So Splash I found to be a very unfulfilling and a very dated film. It has its charms. I guess I'm going to give it the very softest kind of a recommend. Like, there's things about it, and you might find it sort of interesting, but I think it's going to depend a little bit on your age. I think if you're my age or older, there's some stuff in Splash that you're going to like or at least be sort of nostalgic about. And I think that if you are younger than me, you are not going to have any time for that. But hey, that's fine. Whatever. So anyway, that's Splash, and that's Twilight, and I'm me, and I'm telling you to stay safe, watch movies.